This is to say, girls, if you love the sound of your own voice, start a podcast. There's nothing like it. Okay, dolls. So we are back for another episode of D-Talk. Hi, my name's David, and on this podcast, we talk about creativity, critical thinking, leading into our cringe, all the good things. We're here for fun, we're here for nonsense, a little bit of self-development, a lot of gay stuff. Honestly. So if it's something you think you might be interested in, you can watch the videos in my playlist. We got lots of D-Talk, all of that good stuff. We talk about drag and the queer experience, and we really get right into it. So if you're listening to this on Spotify, you can actually watch the video versions of this podcast on YouTube and vice versa, whatever you think, dolls. You can find it wherever fine podcasts are found. So today, friends, what I would like to talk about is this sentence that I've been thinking of for the past few weeks, and it's just been stuck in my head and it just keeps coming back to me. And I want to talk about it. So the sentence is, does the answer matter? A big part of the struggle I found in my human experience is like trying to figure out answers. I figured out through a lot of self-development. I love it so much. Those are the only kinds of books I read. From ranging, oh my God, Bimini's book right here, Bimini Bon Boulash. I love reading about people's experiences, and I'm really interested in sharing mine. So a lot of the anxiety that I experience, I think, comes from trying to find answers, right? I'm a truth teller, and I look for the truth. I have a very complicated relationship with like this sense of lying and like liars and like people who are being deceptive. That's why I like leaning into content. Like I've been filming some scammy videos and like looking at scams, and I'm really into like anti-MLM content and catfish and things like that. I really like paying attention to deception. I don't know. I'm also interested in like the acting side of it too, because acting and deceiving is kind of like the same thing. And if you have the skills of one, you probably have the skills of the other, or have access to those skills. Rather or not, they might not be developed or not. But I just find real interest in all of this. So the title of our episode today, kids, is called Does the Answer Matter? And we're going to look at that through some of the things that I've been studying here. So I have my laptop here, and I'm going to go through the notes that I have written in some of my courses that correspond with this idea of does the answer matter? So babes, let's get into it. So currently, at the time of this recording, I am in one master's course, and people ask me all the time. They're like, David, what are you doing? What have you been up to? And I always forget that I'm actually doing this. And it's not that I'm not putting a lot of work into it. I am, but it's weird to feel so spread out, as it were. So we're going to get into some of these things. Oh my God, even the text of the document I'm about to read is red. Hilarious. It was me. I color coded things because I'm that kind of girl. So I'm studying right now for a master's of education with a specialization in neuroscience. And I'm going to be talking about this from like the educative framework, or rather my responses that we're going to talk about here together were written in response to the readings that I've been reading in this master's course. However, what is what is outstanding, it's very surprising and at times frustrating to me, how well educational theory fits just life, because life is education. Passing information from one individual to another is life. That's how society has been constructed over the years, because it's not the same cycle of each individual learning the same thing and not passing anything on. Like the last podcast that I did with comrade Yulia Borscht, when she said that octopi develop so quickly, but they can't teach anything onto their children or coming generations, so they don't actually succeed in building a society. So interesting. If we're framing our conversation around this idea of does the answer matter, we kind of put ourselves on a continuum. Right? So does the answer matter can relate to a lot of things. So a really basic example is, let's say you're walking down the street and there's a car that drives by and somebody in the car just like yells something at you, right? Something offensive or mean, right? In this situation, it begs the question, does the answer matter? Do you actually need to know why that person did what they did? Do you need to understand and agree with what they did in order for you to move past it? And it brings up a really interesting conversation here about like personal responsibility versus like intention, because I've heard a lot of people say that if your intentions weren't bad, like if I hurt you and my intentions were not to hurt you, does that matter? Where does the line of intention stop to where you're still responsible for what you've done, even if you have intended to do it? So many of the worst things that have happened in the world's history have been done with good intentions. What I'm getting at here is you can delude yourself into thinking that you are doing the right thing when in fact you're not. And I think that's just part of the human experience. I have a history of doing that as well. I'm getting better at closing that gap because it doesn't make you feel good. But anyway, in the hopes that this is all making sense, we're kind of building this idea of like the continuum, and it's this place in between. So if we follow this example, if somebody yells something at you from a moving car and you're on the street, there's a few different things that you can do, right? In that moment, you can respond or you can react, of course. So like responding would be you wouldn't really have time to respond because a response requires time and a response requires you to not be dysregulated. And most people would probably become dysregulated if they were yelled at. And speak from experience, even a few weeks ago, it was funny. I laughed. I was still dysregulated anyway. Or you could react as the other one. So you could yell back or like flip them off or take their license plate or whatever you're going to do. And sometimes we can make some bold assumptions about what that person thinks about us in those moments. And sometimes our projections onto those people hurt our own feelings when we don't even understand their intention. But then that begs the question, does the intention matter? See where I'm going with this? It feels like an abstract concept, but it just, sometimes you don't need the answer for why somebody did something in order to respond appropriately. And I don't know if that's something that everybody struggles with, but because I struggle with truth telling, sometimes I find it comforting to focus on the wrong things. And while that can be comfortable in the moment, it doesn't actually get you anywhere. Okay, so here's a real life example that I wrote about in one of these responses, and it has to do with teaching, but I think anybody can understand it. And it's very well written, and I took my time with it, so you best believe I'm going to read you what I wrote. Picture it. The last bell of the day has rang in a school, and the last student has loudly stomped their way out of the doors in their oversized winter boots, and the school is now silent. I'd like to talk about 2 stereotypes of teachers and how they behave at the end of the school day. There's something to be said for the dichotomy of teachers' lived experiences outside of the presence of their students versus when they're together. So what I mean there is it's a very opposite end of the spectrum when you are with your students and when you are not. It's just there's so much stimulation and information and choices to be made at all times as you're monitoring an entire classroom of individuals. But then when they're gone, it is kind of the extreme opposite. And not that dissimilar to a diver experiencing the bends as the pressure releases as they come up from a dive too quickly, right? So that's what I'm talking about here. So teachers face all of these demands throughout the entire school day, but at the end, it all disappears. I just wrote it in such a professional way that I'm trying to make it sound more colloquial because I'm saying this out loud. But let me just read what I wrote. Teachers face an incredible amount of demand throughout the school day, and suddenly at the end of the day, the majority of those demands disappear. The presence of emails and mental to-do lists persist beyond the presence of students, but the physical and tangible emotional need for teachers to be present is no longer required. There is an intense emotional pressure that relieves itself at the end of the day when the students go home. Teachers go from feeling this incredible sense of duty and responsibility to a diverse set of ranging emotional, social, and psychological needs to silence. One way that I find teachers cope with this situation is to immediately leave. Sometimes even with the students to avoid that emotional drop-off. You can guess which category I fell into. It was me. But the majority of teachers fall into this category that I lovingly refer to as the lurkers. So these lurkers, these are the teachers that stand in the hallway and talk and talk and talk, sometimes seemingly in circles over and over again to engage themselves in conversation. These after-school conversations can range from anything like administrative questions, gossipy nonsense, the misery Olympics, where everybody brags about how much they're overworking themselves, to deep emotional conversations that build a strong sense of community with support for students. What I'm trying to illuminate here is that the idea that some teachers actively put effort into staying at school longer than necessary in order to cope with this idea of no longer being with the presence of their students. There are, of course, many teachers that don't fit into these 2 categories. I do believe that most of them fall in one, but of course there are outliers. Of course there are outliers, David. It's so interesting to me because so if we're looking at the example of does the answer matter? So I taught for 4 years and 4 of those years were in grade 4. So I have a lot of experience building classroom community and and teaching styles and like dynamics, and especially through these master's programs too, man. I'm just like, it's so good. I'm so excited to get back into teaching as well. It's not going to happen today, probably not tomorrow, but soon and one day, and definitely not for the rest of my life. But you get the picture. I do really enjoy the act of it, and I'd like to expand my experience there. But I do have a lot of experience in culture and classroom culture and school culture, and how people and leaders and pretty much everybody can contribute to that culture. And I'm fascinated with it. So that's why we're talking about schools here. But if we're looking at this question, does the answer matter? If you're looking at a teacher, and I remember looking at other teachers, and this is like, I, I need to say here that I'm not here to shade the teachers. I have so much love and respect for teachers. Like, it just, it is such a hard, emotionally intense job that I burnt out in. Not even just the ones who have been doing it for all of these years. Even if you spent a week in a class, no, even if you went to sub one day, you still felt something. Like, you still, like, teaching is so hard. And I start these conversations not because I want to feel, not because I want to come off as like shamey, but I want to come off in a way that starts these conversations. And these conversations I'm sure could be transferable to pretty much every profession that's out there, but my lens is teaching, so that's why I'm talking about that. So I love teachers, so don't think that I'm like ragging on them. But what I what I was gonna say, I remember looking at those teachers that stayed at school for so long, like 5, 6, 7, 8 hours after the school day had ended. Like, it seemed like they lived their lives there. Everybody does have an individual level of productivity too. So like, I have to say that some of those teachers that I've experienced that stay so long at school, they are actually putting in an incredible amount of work, and they are creating such a diversified program of studies for every student. And they're just, I've seen teachers like that that dedicate their entire life to their practice, and they are so good at it. Every kid loves them. They're just so good. It's chef's kiss. But they're not putting themselves first. So it's not sustainable, and you're risking yourself and your health for the well-being of your students. And while if I'm a kid that moved through that class and loved you, that's great for me. You're having an awesome impact on the world, but you're not putting yourself first. And you have to if you want your life to be sustainable. And it's hard. So there are people, I'm not saying that all these people are there wasting time, but everybody wastes time to some extent. I waste time, especially when I'm trying to not face feelings as well. Like, there's so many layers to this conversation. So if you're looking at teachers, does the answer matter why they're staying so much at school? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. You got to get home. You got to go. You got to put yourself first. It's almost like what I'm trying to say here is that it's almost like the situation. Oh, okay, what does Dr. Phil say? He says you're talking about issues, not topics. Like, you have to be talking about the issues and not the topics. Maybe that's what I'm getting at here. So, like, you see, right? It's like the symptom versus the diagnosis. Like, it's not always the same. So this is kind of saying, does the symptom matter? No, not really, because, well, when you frame it like that, but it's more the diagnosis. It's like, what is actually happening in front of you is what you need to be paying attention to. The reasoning behind it, it can be important to know sometimes. And in lots of situations, the answer does matter. And it's very pertinent information that people need to know. And I understand that and acknowledge that. But what I'm trying to say here is sometimes I get caught up in this idea of needing to know things. And then when you get lost in that anxious of anxiety of whatever, because then, okay, so if I look at my side of this equation, I left pretty early, pretty frequently. I am a very productive, efficient individual. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I've been able to pump out this content 30 reels a day. Like, no, but it's 3. Like, I am doing so much right now. I'm studying, I'm making content, I'm editing YouTube videos, podcasts, makeup tutorials. Like, does size matter? I'm doing all these things, getting out there in drag, performing, dancing, styling wigs, not styling wigs well, but styling wigs nonetheless. And I'm doing all these things. I used all of my time when I was at school very efficiently. If there was a spare moment, I was doing my mental checklist. And of course, there are things that you have to do on a daily basis that like pile up. I would be using all of my breaks. Whenever the kids were not with me, I was doing all of those things necessary that I needed to do. And then I was done at the end of the day. Maybe 10 minutes after the kids were gone, I would be out, right? Because I did feel that drop off, because you just go from so much to so little. And then I didn't want to be there. I wasn't really happy in that space unless I was with my students, right? because they were the reason. They're the reason that I'm interested in teaching. Like I do like getting to know colleagues, and you can learn a lot about colleagues, but ultimately at the end of the day, I still feel like a kid, and I love bringing a leadership sense into somebody's life. Like I think about things so deeply, and I am a very mindful person, and I just slow down. And one of the things that I remember one of my principals saying about me once was that I listen before I speak. And I remember thinking about that because even now, sometimes when I am out in situations, I can come off as quiet. But most often, in those times when I am quiet, and this happens in social and professional situations alike, is that if I'm caught up in listening, I'm really only going to talk unless I feel like I can add upon to the silence or add to the conversation instead of just talking out of my hoo ha. Because I feel like a lot of people do that. Because I think the perception perhaps is the one who talks most is the smartest. And I've always thought the opposite. Like I like paying attention to the people that are more quiet. And I like going up to those quiet people and going, what do you think? But because I listen before I talk, like I love passing that on. And it provides a really beautiful framework for a classroom community to get on and actually learn things. Because if you don't have community, you can't teach them anything. So my community building skills are very, very high. So my teaching part, I think, is probably pretty average, to be completely honest with you. But because I have such a better open mindset, I think I can reach kids more with that. And we can go farther with those educative things, or we can go farther with those academic things because they're so open and comfortable and ready to fail. So does the answer matter? But then you can take it back even farther than that to wonder this. You can wonder, David, why are you like that? And when I hear people say like, I'm an old soul, I don't know if I necessarily understand what that means or like identify with that, because I think sometimes when people go through trauma, I think most often when people go through trauma at young ages, you develop this sense of maturity really quickly. And sometimes that can be seen as like an old soul when in fact, no, it was required of me to grow up maybe a little bit sooner than I should have, right? That's something that I see in kids and adults alike all around me. It happens to a lot of people, right? So does the answer matter? At some points it does, because sometimes you need to go into that and think about it, maybe in therapy. It's probably a pretty good place. But like, does the answer matter? After you've dealt with it, I don't know if the answer does matter. I don't know if the answer matters. Do you think the answer matters? This is a weird one, but I couldn't get past this idea of does the answer matter? Like you can apply this to pretty much anything in your life. It's just it's so interesting to me. Like, does the answer matter? Because sometimes it's yes and sometimes it's no, of course. But I want you to think about your understanding when you are making the decision, does the answer matter, next time you're trying to figure out something? Because that's kind of honestly our whole life is just walking with the attitude of learning and trying to figure things out, right? Being curious about ourselves. Oh my God. Like I said before, I think it's easy to get caught up in question seeking and truth telling like I do. And because there are inevitably situations where you need to know the answers for things, right? You require answers. And I'm not challenging those moments because they do exist. But sometimes I think we don't need to know the answer, but we want to know the answer. And there's a big difference between those two things. So sometimes it's easy to get caught up in that and you're ignoring everything that is right in front of you. I just keep thinking of this in like teaching standards, but it would work for pretty much any interaction you have with another human out in the world. Like, okay, if we give this example, if it's the first day of school and you have a child in your class who is being aggressive, let's say, or it escalates and there's like a chair thrown, or like there's a hit or a punch or a throw or a whatever. Okay, this is just bear with me here because this might sound weird, but my explanation I think will rationalize what I'm going to say. So, okay, if you're experiencing that student in your class, a lot of teachers would want to know that child's history, and I think that's normal. I think that has been normalized. But I don't think, because I want to get to a world where that back information doesn't really necessarily inform how you respond to that student in that moment. Like, sure, there can be specific things in there, like don't turn off the lights. Like, I've seen that in files before where it's this student has trauma associated with dark spaces, like things like that. Or this student is scared of mascots, or like there can be so many things that you should know. But what I'm alluding to here is, do you think there's a possibility that somebody could develop their patterns of behavior and teaching style to such a level as to be able to respond to that situation appropriately without that back information? I think it's possible, because what I'm arguing against here is that if you know all that back information, sometimes that can affect the way that you respond in the moment, and it might not actually be the best thing, right? Like, it should be a fresh start for those kids. I don't think everybody needs to know everything all the time. So like in this example, does the answer matter? I don't think the answer does matter, because if your focus needs to be on what it is right in front of you in the moment and making those critical decisions on what somebody needs. Yes, what they need might be informed by that back information. But just I think it's easy to get caught up in this idea that we need to know. And sometimes you don't, because it can negatively impact the way that you respond. In the same way that, like, if somebody yells at you on the street, do you need to know the reason why in order to show kindness to them? Like, we don't need to be like, right? Can't you act with the attitude of kindness without knowing the answers to people's behavior? I think it's possible. I'm hoping this makes sense. I don't know what I am talking about today, but I keep coming back and I keep getting glimpses of it, right? It's this idea of like critical consciousness, that you're able to engage kind of with the two parts of each. You're able to build that spectrum, right? And this is kind of what I'm talking about here, is the idea of critical consciousness, where you're on that spectrum and you're standing in the middle and you're looking at option A and you're looking at option B. If it's a false dichotomy, there could be A through L. But you looking at all of those answers doesn't really make a difference as to what you should do, I don't think, all the time. I'm trying not to speak in absolutes, but you understand where I'm coming from now at this point. You can be looking at all those answers, and sometimes the answer that you lay your eyes upon is the one that you go with. And that can inevitably add to more stress or less stress or no stress or something. There's going to be consequences for anything that you assign is the reason to something. But if you don't know the actual answer behind it, it would just be inappropriate to assume, because then you're projecting that onto other people, right? So really the strength, I believe, and what I'm trying to say here is the strength is that you're standing in the middle and you can look at all of these things. You're looking at all of the possibilities and you're acknowledging that, well, it could be all, some, or none. And I need to be okay with not knowing the answer before responding with that other person, or just with myself, because you do respond with yourself or you do react with yourself. It's both, right? That is very bright. I just changed up the lighting because the sun, I know, it's like a sunset chat. This is so romantic for us. If you're listening to the audio, there's like a nice sunset. It's great. You know what a sunset is. Okay, so there's this author and educator and just amazing person that I've learned about in the last little bit, and his name is Paulo Freire, and he wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is a really great book that I've only read a few chapters out of. You know what I thought about the other night is that I am 27 years old, and 19 of those years I have spent in school. That's not including the ones I was a teacher, because I was, you know what, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, I spent 23 years of my life within the confines of a school. Isn't that ridiculous? It's probably even less. Anyway, I just feel I have a lot of diverse, like, social knowledge about what happens in schools, because I've been a critical thinker in schools for pretty much ever. And does the answer matter? I've been trying to find those answers. And the more answers I look for, the more I realize that the answers don't matter. It's what you do with that information, and it's what you do in the absence of that information that really informs everything that happens after. And that is ultimately what matters, is where you are going, not where you came from. Cotton Eye Joe, get out of here. But anyway, so here's this quote from Paulo Freire. The importance of having an enormous capacity to love in order to carry out the arduous and often difficult task of announcing the cruel and obscene assaults against human beings who have the least, when it is so much easier and comfortable to accommodate the power structure from which we really reap benefits. I wasn't born just to watch the world as it is right now. I have numerous possibilities to shake the structure of the world. And I think this does the answer matter is my way, perhaps, of shaking my structure of the world, at least, because I think if I practice doing it with myself, then I can start to bring it outside of the realm of just me and start sharing that with others. I already really have. And Paulo Freire talks a lot about critical consciousness that we talked about. It's occupying that space between like the political and the possible and everything in between. There was this line here too. He was never bigger than, he was always a part of. Maybe a reason why I hold on to this idea so personally, even though I don't have a fully developed understanding of it, is like, because when you engage in critical thinking about your thoughts, feelings, and actions, you are able to engage in creativity more openly and freely. I'm sorry, if you're critical, I'm not sorry, if you're critical of everything going on around you and you're actively there and you're present and you're making context specific decisions, you should be able to operate from a framework of understanding that can meet anybody where they are in any given moment. And the answers don't matter because how are you going to know the answer to everything? And maybe that relates too with how uncomfortable people in the world feel about being wrong or making mistakes. Oh my God, that is just I don't get it. I don't get it. But I should understand it because I lived there for 25 years of my life. It's only been within the last handful of years of my life that I've become okay with making mistakes. And hell, I'm even sitting here making these mistakes on camera now because I am so violently leaning into my creativity that a mistake is not a mistake to me. A mistake is another step towards the journey of success. But the problem is, however you define success right now is not how you are going to define success when you actually feel like you achieve it. And it's these broken expectations that often set us up for disappointment. Okay, that's where I was going with this whole, it is this idea of broken expectations too, right? Because, okay, let's say you don't have the answer to something, you're like, it's option L, and that's what you're going with. And maybe that's a hurtful answer or helpful answer. It honestly doesn't matter. But then let's say you do figure out the answer. Awesome. Now you have to reintegrate your way of thinking. You might become dysregulated. It takes more time out of your life and it might influence you in a negative way moving forward. Because if you then later figure out the answer, you have to do all that. You have to do all that work, right? And it ends up wasting your time. So existing in this middle ground is a better space to be in. It's like, it's neutrality basically, right? We grew up in a time of like I grew up in a time of like body negativity and like especially people who were overweight. There was so much bullying, and even as I go back and rewatch like videos like Drag Race, even for example, like season 1, season 2, there was a lot of fat phobia going on. And I'm sorry, I'm not the girl who throws out the F word like that. I am not, because I think it is overused. However, there's so much fat phobia going on in there, and I feel like we've almost swung to the other extreme now where it's body positivity, because I think some of those things go too far. And I think a lot of the ways that people publish that kind of content that I believe goes too far is a form of coping for those people. So I completely understand and have a sense of empathy, but I don't agree with it. But then there's somewhere in the middle, and it is body neutrality. And I think neutrality is the place for me. And I think it makes the most sense for me, because if you can exist in this middle ground, you can not know things and still feel okay. I don't know if I do know so many people struggle with this, and the idea of being wrong and the idea of saying, I don't know. I've seen it in kids so much, and it really opened my eyes to actually notice it in adults, because most kids are just terrified of doing wrong. Tell me why art class in grade 4 was probably one of the hardest things to facilitate. It's art, girl. You literally do whatever is art. You know what? You can literally give me 40 seconds here with a thing of markers and I can create art. Like, sure, there's different things that you're learning it through the lens of. We're doing pastels, we're painting, we're doing, I don't know, shaving cream. It was a little very arts and crafts. I loved coming up with those lessons, but these kids would just be terrified of making mistakes, or what they would deem to be good is bad. So most of the lessons that I would end up bringing to them were like these expressionist things, or like absurdity things that forced you to make mistakes as well, and that there was no like good finished product and you got to decide, and it was because art is supposed to be a reflection of your individual experience, not a reflection of what you see out in the world against some random standard. So yeah, kids really struggle with being wrong. And then it's like, they move into adulthood. And I feel like what happens is most people are still afraid of being wrong, but they're getting better at hiding it. So they just say whatever. They just say whatever. Yeah. Sometimes when you ask somebody something, like let's say you're in a store and you're like, hey, random question, do you have any Brazil nuts? And they look at you and they go, no. And it just took that extra second where it pings in your brain, or at least it does for me, where I go, I think you just said that to me because you want me to walk away, which is fair. I understand that. Been there. However, can you just like ask somebody else, or like point me in the direction of somebody who would know about my Brazil nuts? This is sounding very high maintenance and this is just a silly example. But like in those situations, like, does the answer matter? Sometimes it does, right? Taking that extra step to actually be present. I don't know. Everybody's terrified of being wrong. And I feel like people just give an answer instead of actually saying, I don't know. Because it almost feels like a sense of defeat if you don't know something or if you're wrong about something. And that's just like the way that I moved through that idea is like rejection therapy and just being wrong all the time until I'm more comfortable with it. And not even being wrong, but like making mistakes and having mess ups and not being perfect. Like, just throw it out there. Life's about putting it out there. And then sometimes it's about throwing it right in the trash. And you have to, like, you don't have to be as proud as those trash moments as you do everything else, but you have to have some sense of pride for everything that you do, because you have to know who you are and deliver at all times. If you're afraid of being wrong at something, or if you're afraid of having your intentions kind of hijacked, you need to have 3 things in order to confidently share your perspective or your ideas with the world. And these 3 things are, number 1, research. You have to come from a place of research. If you're presenting anything to the world, you need to have done the most rudimentary amount of research to make sure that what you are spreading is factual. You have to have at least some base of understanding in order to share something. Second one is good intentions. You need to have good intentions. I know we've kind of talked about intentions and like slighted them a little bit, but intentions matter for ourselves, I think, more than the impact on others with our behavior. And then the third one is be willing to be brought in. When those mistakes are made, you need to be willing to hear about them. That's why everybody's afraid of marks and critiques. And I'm not sitting here saying that I don't suffer from that. My heart races when I get an email about an assignment in these master's courses. Like I'm the same. We're going to look at one more story here. And you know what? This is going to be a little bit self-indulgent for me. I'm going to do it because I want to share this story with the world. And of course, I am getting very good at not leaving in any identifying information. And this story happened, and it has not been dramatized. This is the story how it happened, and it just blows my mind. And I don't have tangible answers from it. And in this situation, babes, I truly believe the answer does not matter, and it continues to not matter. I will never, ever, ever, that's 3, forget the backlash I received from one parent that I had of a student who was morally outraged that I had read a book to one of my drama classes that was titled How to Be a Real Man. The other video I filmed, that book was up there. It's a great book. The book was made for children and followed a story of a little boy who was learning how to be a real man through the lens of his father, who at one point in the book put on a pink sparkly dress and danced around. Of course, being a real man is not exclusive to your expression of femininity, or equally so, a real woman is not exclusive to your expression of masculinity, but rather our existence as human beings is the consistent oscillation between your expressions of masculinity and femininity. This parent was very upset with the concept and showed up in our office visibly shaken. Seething might be the right word here. I've never seen someone quite so upset about something that felt so trivial to me, but in real life, standing right in front of me. At this point, I had had a lot of experience meeting people where they were when it came to limiting ideas of gender and gender identity, but most often parents would confuse the 2 separate concepts of sexual orientation and gender identity, which are sometimes completely exclusive and unrelated. Sexual orientation and health is indeed a conversation that needs to take place at age-appropriate times through permission from parents and guardians, if it's done in a school setting. Gender identity, however, is not an adult conversation. Whether we realize it or not, human beings, we are engaged in gender identity at almost every point of our daily lives. It is enforced upon us at almost every moment. This idea of conforming to gender norms is a part of the structural oppression used to stifle the voices of people who threaten our current oppression. This is good. I'm a good writer. Should I start a blog, or do you like listening to my voice too? Anyway, This parent, sitting in my principal's office, was adamant that her daughter should not be taught that she is capable of expressing masculinity because she was born a girl. This woman sitting in front of me was wearing. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna say it. It's just because it was something that struck me as interesting. This woman sitting in front of me was wearing baggy camouflage cargo pants. You know, the ones with like 8 pockets on each leg? That was dramatized. Right there. There were not 8 pockets on each leg. That was a joke. Okay. She had short hair, thick framed glasses, Oakley glasses, sorry, and other various masculinized traits that were chosen and not inherited. And I remember sitting there in complete disbelief thinking, how can you disagree with a diverse gender expression when you in fact express more masculinity than me, a person who is assigned male? I'm sitting here with a beard and painted nails, and you look like most of my friends. I'm friends with a lot of queer people, okay? It was then, however, that I realized that these ideas and these phobias, they weren't originating in this woman. Her fear and discomfort and discrimination was banked within her through a lack of critical thought. Anyone who would think for themselves and be critical of a situation would be metaphorically punched in the face by the irony of the situation, but she was simply blind to the contradictions of what she thought she was fighting for. It's interesting because she was projecting an absolute ignorance onto others, including me, which is a very clear characteristic of the ideology of oppression that negates education and knowledge as a process of inquiry. Because everything in life should be a process of inquiry. You can hear things from other people and take those, because everything in life is a process of inquiry. You can get information from other people. You can receive answers from other people, but sometimes those answers are wrong. And if you don't possess the critical skills and able to understand for yourself what those answers are, you are putting yourself at a grave disposition here, besties. You need to be able to make those critical decisions on your own and not just take information that has been given to you and you've taken as fact. Because if you continue with those wrong answers without being critical, you can really damage people around you. And I do believe that's what was happening here. She considered her ignorance to be absolute, and that justified her own existence. The fact that I was creating critical thought within my students was incredibly, understandably, uncomfortable for her. And I remember being very upset. I was able to have a good conversation I was proud of the way I behaved because I wasn't dysregulated, and I wanted to be there and present, and that was my goal, and I did that, so that was great. I don't really remember the specifics of the conversation. I just remember the irony of it all, because the answer doesn't matter as to why that behavior was there. It is the diagnosis of what is happening right in front of you in the moment that I needed to respond to, because I didn't have the information of why. So in that moment, the answer doesn't matter, because sometimes you need to respond or react without all the information. And it's a good habit to be able to do that. Yeah, because developing the habits that allow you to respond to a situation without having all of the background information is an incredible skill that leads to a higher quality of life. So remember that. So one of the things that I struggle with is because it's easy, and I see this a lot in the queer community specifically, is that if somebody, like, let's say there's a protester and they're saying, gay is a crime, or you're going to hell, or whatever, some transphobic women, trans women aren't women, right? It would be super easy to go up to them and like swear at them and tell them they're awful and walk away. And I wouldn't disagree with that. And would it be satisfying to do that? Absolutely. Does it create a helpful narrative and story for that one individual? No, it doesn't. It's so hard to be able to react in ways that don't alienate people, because they're already somewhat alienated. And I remember in this moment when I was there with this woman, I wasn't, maybe it was in the tone that I was saying, or like how scientifically I was talking about what she was saying. I feel like I alienated her with like too much information, or I didn't appeal to her sensibilities in such a way that she was able to be present there with me. Is that my responsibility? Is that my responsibility as a queer teacher to do that kind of incredibly intensive emotional labor for everybody? It's a great question. It burnt me out, because that wasn't the only instance that I did that, especially because I was searching for answers that I never got, and that wasted a lot of my time. But if you actually want to make a difference with somebody, you have to make them uncomfortable just enough as to not alienate them, because if people are alienated, they're not listening. I like shocking people. I like being outlandish and at times, professionally, irreverent. I know that I have alienated a lot of people in my life when I was coming from a place of liberation, but does the answer matter of where I was coming from? Not really, because it got the outcome that it got, and I needed to respond according to outcomes, not intentions. Ooh. Ooh, that's good. You need to respond to outcomes and not intentions. I like that because it doesn't matter really why the intention. Like I know you might disagree with hearing that, and I did too for a long time, but if you carry the intention of others with you and place such an emotionally high level of value to that, you're putting your life and you're putting your human experience into the hands of somebody else. And that's not a good time. That's not a good time. So it is a very delicate balance of placing just enough pressure on somebody and their ideology to allude to a bigger picture that they're missing out on, while not overwhelming them so much as to alienate them from your cause. Furthermore, because I'm an academic writer, I wrote furthermore, each individual's person. Oh, this one is this is word salad. You ready? Each individual person's level of comfort is unique, and unless you are present and paying attention, you're not going to be able to assess the amount of pressure you're able to put upon somebody's worldview before they stop listening. Because you don't actually need to know the answers of where they're coming from. You need to be present enough in the moment in order to meet them where they are. Because if you know all the answers in a situation, how long ago were those answers valid? And like, whose understanding and perspective did you hear those answers from? Like, even if you hear something from somebody, our memory is just so poor too. So we often say things that aren't true and didn't happen. And like, it's so easy to construct, and like eyewitness testimony is just shockingly not valid. And like, our memories are pretty shit. Like, I'm sorry. It's just, you can get the answer from somebody, and that's not even the answer, but they should be the ones who know, but it's still not it. This idea of expectations and experiences, right? They don't always line up. And I don't like to subscribe to the school of thought of I don't expect anything out of life because I never get anything. And if you don't love, you can't get hurt. And like those false binaries of thought, because I think life is worth you putting yourself out there in a vulnerable way and loving others and letting yourself be hurt by other people only in situations that you have a system of coping that affects you and those around you in a net positive level, in a net positive way. However, I think sometimes we really get caught in the expectations of what we think things will be, right? So like if you have this idea of what your life is going to look like, or if you have this idea of you're going to get this job, or like there's expectations, or I'm going to look this way by this time, or like I'm going to achieve this by 2027, or any expectation that you put upon yourself can be broken. And those broken expectations can lead to a lot of disappointment within yourself because of this absolutist thinking. It's these wants and needs that come out of the way that we think about our lives and the way that it should be. And a lot of it leads to sadness because what actually happens in your life doesn't line up with what you are actually experiencing. And I know that a big part of people wanting to know the answers to things is so they can have an expectation that they can build, because it's comfortable to have an expectation. It really is, until that expectation is broken. But that's why I think a lot of the times the answers don't matter, because you should not have this idea of an expectation. You can have options. Again, you need to be sitting in this middle ground and looking at options A through L, and you could go, well, I guess I can expect any of these 14 things, but to be sure, I can't. I don't know if we're like really interested in broken expectations, but like it also contributes to like good TV. If you're just listening, I did the air quotes there for good TV. If you go back to like, again, I'm going to bring up Drag Race. I've been rewatching season 2, and like the reunion, and that is pretty entertaining, but it is problematic to a certain extent. They do talk a lot on that show about people's hardships and people coming out as trans and people being left at a bus stop. And there's all of these traumatic, and people losing their parents and partners, and there's all of these traumatic pieces that go into filming a show like that, and you have to wonder why. It's obviously done, like there has to be a ratings component because nobody does anything without a payoff, so they have to be continuously showing these sides of the queens for a reason. It's because there's broken expectations there. If somebody has went through an incredible amount of trauma and emotional hardship and things in life that would deem them not a typical person to have the level of success that they do being on the show, they want to platform that and they want to show that and they want to appeal to people's broken expectations because that keeps people interested. And you can now have the expectation that, oh, I went through bad things too. So I can set that same expectation for myself of that's where I'm going to go and that's what I'm going to achieve, which on the surface doesn't sound like a bad idea, but your expectations don't matter. What matters is the work that you put behind what your goals are. What you will get out of working on that, what you will get out of working on those goals you're interested in developing, who's to say? Anything can lead you anywhere at any time. Girl, a year ago, I was sitting in a classroom full of 22 grade 4 students. And now here I am recording, what is this, episode 11 of my podcast here in my Calgary apartment. Anything can lead you anywhere at any time. So sometimes those expectations can lead you in directions that you're just, because if you're not present, if you're focused on one option, you're not looking at all of the others. So be able to take a step back and look at all of the opportunities that are in front of you at all times. You will miss things if you have set such a stern set of expectations upon yourself and your experience. It's like all discomfort comes from broken expectations. It doesn't matter what you expect out of doing something. It's the amount of time and quality you can put into pursuing something that you enjoy. You're not going to be able to become a world famous drag queen just because you were also left at a bus stop by your mom. That's a really specific sentence. There was a queen on RuPaul's Drag Race who was left at a bus stop, right? That's where that's coming from, right? It's not those negative experiences that are going to get you where you want. It's going to be all of the work that you can put in. If you want to become a world famous anything, you need to put in time and effort. The overnight success takes 10 years. I'm here in year 2 or year like 7. I don't know how to conjugate that for myself, but I'm working on not building any expectations for what I'm doing, and it's leading to less disappointment. And then that time that I would spend being disappointed, I'm able to put into fun and creative things and develop my critical thinking skills and doing my readings in a present way and doing my assignments and final projects and podcasts and makeup videos and drag and dance and theater and absurdity. We're doing it all. So girlies, sometimes the answers do matter, but I challenge you in the moments where you don't know the answer to be comfortable in the middle and accepting the unrest. This is my last podcast before I go to LA. So if you're listening to this within the week that I'm publishing this episode, hi, I'm in LA right now. Probably wearing the same red top with the same red face because it was a practice for this. But if you're listening to Spotify, you don't know that. So besties, thank you so much for joining me. This one was a little bit more like avant-garde, like very Saint-Tropez, like a little pin the tail on the donkey, but like deep and abstract, you know what I mean? And like educational as well. So let me know what you thought of this episode. Comment down below, like and share if you liked it and want to share it. You know, I believe in you. You have so much more influence over your life than you might be giving yourself credit for. And it's time you start living for yourself because you matter so much. And I'm so glad that you're here and just basically on this earth, babe. So thanks for listening. I will see you next week for episode 12. Oh my God. Next week, episode 12, I sit down with Spencer. I don't know if you've heard of Spencer or know Spencer. She's probably one of the funniest individuals I know. And you're going to find out why next week. And sorry to everybody in my life who thought they were funny. You probably are, just not as funny as Spencer. Okay, thanks so much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.